Cool. Hey everyone, welcome to Make Anything. My name's Devin, and today we're gonna make some cute little candy corn lights. They're a great way to get into the Halloween spirit. And sorry. Hey everyone, welcome to Make Anything. My name's Devin.
Not today, bro.
Okay, I guess plans have changed. We might have to wait on those candy corn. And let's go ahead and make a cyborg mask. That'll be cool.
Cool.
So we're gonna be making a bionic eye mask using this Instamorph moldable plastic. I used this in the past to make my own dental retainers, and today we're gonna see if it can be used to make a form-fitting face mask for this bionic eye. This stuff is pretty cool. You just soak these PCL plastic pellets in hot water for about 2 minutes, and then they become soft enough to mold. So we're gonna go ahead and soften this up, and then we're gonna roll it out with a rolling pin to try to make a nice thin sheet of this plastic. It cools down pretty quickly at room temperature, so I'll just keep going back and forth between soaking it in hot water and then bringing it out and rolling it flat to try to get the most consistent sheet I can. And once I've got a good sized sheet, about 3 or 4 millimeters thick, as it's cooling down, we're gonna put it over Frederick's face and try to mold it to match the shape of his face. I was skeptical that the plastic might be too hot to actually mold over someone's face, but it turned out it cooled down pretty quickly while still remaining flexible and moldable for 1 or 2 minutes. And I'm also gonna trace out the basic shape for this cyborg mask. Once the plastic turns white again, you know it's hardened and it can be peeled off and maintain its shape. The next step was to cut out that shape, and I decided to use an X-Acto knife. It did take a bit of force, so you definitely want to be careful and always cut away from your other hand, but in this case it helped me get a cleaner cut than some scissors might have. So we'll carefully go around and cut out the entire shape that I traced out, and then we can cut the rest of the plastic up and reuse it later on for another project. Next, I decided to desolder some circuit boards I had from a broken 3D printer, and I'm basically gonna use these little components as details to stick on top of the mask. This idea of reusing little parts and sourcing things from different points and gluing it all together is known as kit bashing, and that's gonna help us get a really cool mask without too much effort. Of course, I considered 3D printing all the parts, but in this case, just using circuit boards is gonna look a lot more realistic, and it's gonna save us some work as well. As you can see, I'm drawing all over this mask to sketch out my ideas. We're gonna be painting all of this anyways, so it's not a problem. My first idea for creating the circuit pattern all over the mask was to use a 3D pen to get a nice 3D effect, but regardless of how much experience I have with 3D pens, it was still too difficult to get a really clean line. So I scrapped that idea and decided I would just draw on the circuit pattern after we painted the mask. For the bionic eye, I decided to take a lens out of an old pair of sunglasses and cut out a little circular piece that I could integrate to cover the eye and make it look more like a robot. So I used a needle to kind of etch this circle using a circle guide, and then I took it to the bandsaw and very carefully started carving away that circle. I kind of created a little stem so that I could hold onto this without getting too close to the blade. and then slowly carved away a rough circle, and then I was able to just use a sanding block and clean that up afterwards. This plastic sanded really easily, so it was just about a minute of sanding with some 100 grit sandpaper until I got a nice circle. So that lens is going to be combined with these parts that I designed in Fusion 360 and 3D printed, but before we do that, I'm going to kind of trace out this part and carve away with the bandsaw again to make it fit the form of the eye a little bit better. Then I used the nail file to fine-tune that a bit, and finally an X-Acto knife to make a nice smooth connection. Once I got those two parts to fit together nicely, I was able to just use a 3D pen to fuse the parts together. Since they're both made of plastic, it worked quite well. And then I used this other little metal file to try to smooth things out, but it wasn't working too well. So next I tried a soldering iron, and that actually did a decent job of making that connection a little bit more smooth. Now we can continue kit bashing and sticking together these different electrical components that I stole from old broken electronics. So we got some wires, we got some chips, and I just used hot glue to glue them into place. It turns out that hot glue doesn't stick to that Instamorph plastic too well, so for smaller components like these little capacitors and whatnot, I found that super glue worked a lot better. Once I had all those parts glued on, it was time to start painting. So I started with a coat of filler primer, which I got at my local auto body shop. And I'm using a nice high fill primer, which will help fill in any little cracks or imperfections. Still, it was kind of tricky to sand this plastic because it kind of gums up. So to work around that, I thought I might just coat the worst areas in super glue. That way it'll cure and turn into this harder material that will be easier to sand away. And sure enough, after another coat of filler and then sanding, I was able to smooth things out a lot better. It's not perfect, but for a Halloween costume, it'll do the job. Now it's time for our final paint coat, and I'm using this nice shiny metallic paint, which is gonna give us a really sleek and futuristic feel. I gave that 2 or 3 coats, just following the instructions on the can, and it turned out looking really good. Now we can go ahead and assemble these different parts of the eyepiece. I decided to just use little bits of Uhu putty to stick things together. That way we have a strong yet reversible connection in case we want to undo anything or change something later down the road. As you can see, I left one of those rings unpainted. That way we have this nice red accent. Now to finish things off with some surface detail, I went ahead and found a good Sharpie so that I could start drawing on these circuit patterns. As I said, I was gonna use the 3D pen before, but that just didn't look clean enough. Drawing the pattern on with Sharpie is also definitely challenging, but I have a nice and steady hand, so I think it ended up working really well. All of this is basically just freehand, figuring things out as I go along, and trying to cover the mask in a way that looks really cool. Here's what I ended up with. Sure, I made a few little mistakes here and there, but overall, it all comes together and looks really, really cool. All that's left now is to stick this onto Frederick's face, and ideally you would use spirit gum, but in this case we just used some double-sided Japanese tape, and that actually worked really well, as long as you avoid sticking it to any hair. Add some makeup, a fancy costume, and we've got ourselves a real killer cyborg.
This video is terminated. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to stay alive. Ah, 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 ah.